So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session, actually. Uh, the second session got split into two sessions because there's a lot of content and there's a lot of interest and we saw active participation there. So what you see today, session number 3, we are going to cover guidelines for engagement of knowledge institutions for monitoring and evaluation studies 2021. So that's the so what the agenda for today, we'll start with the guidelines for engagement of knowledge institutions for monitoring and evaluation studies, GMU 2021. We released this way back in August 2021, and thereafter there have been a couple of changes to this particular guidelines. So we'll cover that in today's call. We will also briefly touch upon different modes of procurement. So talking about awarding a particular project on nomination basis through a limited tender route and an open tender inquiry. So that's something that we are going to cover in today's call. There are also some other clauses from MESD 2021, which I would like to cover in today's session. But before we get on to today's agenda, I just wanted to quickly do a round of check if there is any pending questions from last session. Anyone would want to raise their hand, unmute himself or herself, and ask the question. So I do remember there was one open question from last meeting where we were discussing about substitution of key personnel, and Deepak had a point whether we can allow more than one key personnel to be substituted. So I'm just going to go back to that specific clause, which clearly says that we will allow we will allow at the max 2 key personnel to be substituted. So I'm just going to quickly go back to that particular clause and read it for you. Yeah, so we are talking about clause 4.4 of the agreement for the project. This very clearly states that such substitution shall be limited to not more than 2 key personnel. So for everybody's clarification, yes, what we had presented last time, where substitution could be done for 2 key personnel, that stands true. For the first substitution, there's a penalty of 20% of the remuneration of that key personnel. And for the second key personnel, the remuneration penalty is up to 50%. Thereafter, no additional substitution of key personnel is permitted. Then it would rather actually lead to termination of the agreement and the contract. So that's one item that we were discussing from
Paresh,
discussing in the last session.
sorry,
Yeah.
this is Param Paresh. I have a query regarding this.
Yeah, Karan.
Regarding
Yes,
substitution. So you said that after the second substitution, if there is a third one, so then that may lead to a cancellation of the the particular agency, right? But is it cancellation or the remuneration for the third resource would be completely deducted? Is that an option?
No, for third key personnel, there is no option for substitution. It clearly states any further substitution may lead to disqualification of the applicant or termination of the agreement.
Right. But it's may, right? But it's not necessarily lead to a disqualification.
In government context, may is often considered to be as the normal course of action.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, and I am also reminded there was one more pending question from our previous sessions, and I'm just going to quickly try to find that out. So this was Ruhani who had asked a query around the difference between an HOO and HOD. So I'm just going to quickly try to open that particular document. Just give me a second. Meanwhile, does anyone else have any question, please? Feel free to unmute yourself and also, I would request people who are not speaking, please put yourself on mute. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen to talk about the definitions given in GFR about HOD and HOO. Metri, can you confirm if you can see my screen? I'm presenting GFR 2017, page number 9.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Rouhani had asked at one point in time whether who is actually an HOO and HOD. So as per GFR, the head of a department is basically an authority or a person, and here it's very clear on the designation. It has to be of a rank of a deputy secretary or above. It is declared by concerned department, so in our case it's GMEO, as head of department in relation to an identifiable establishment or establishments to exercise the delegated financial powers under these rules. So in GMEO context, HOD as of now is Sharinder sir, and he exercises the powers as per delegation of financial powers under these rules. Coming to HOO, HOO is a gazetted officer, so all the requisite qualifications for a gazetted officers hold true there. So again, gazetted officer declared as such in the delegation of financial powers rules, and any other authority declared as such under any general or special orders of the competent authority. So HOO until 31st January was Rajpalji, and we will have a nomination for HOO thereafter soon. So that's the distinction between the two. HOD is probably a more senior person. HOO is probably more in charge of day-to-day operational activities. Rouhani, does that give you more clarification on this couple of
Yes,
clarifications that you
Parish,
asked?
thank you. But I was asked by someone else another question about this. So, is there any
Yeah.
threshold that HO can sanction procurement of this much amount of procurement only, and above that, HOD can only sanction? So, I was looking up in the manual, I couldn't find any threshold as such, but there should be some threshold because HO can't sanction procurement of everything.
True,
So,
true.
Rouhani, actually, shall I just come in there, Paresh?
Yes, sir, please. Yes, sir, please.
So basically, there are certain powers with the HOD that he can further delegate. So it is between an HOD and HOO. If the HOD delegates some of those powers, which he can delegate to the head of office, then just between a specific HOD and HOO, that arrangement can work. Every time there's a change in head of office and HOD, that arrangement has to be renewed. So there is nothing specified over there about powers of the head of office, the financial powers of head of office, but it is to be derived, from other clauses of the delegation of financial powers, and is a very specific arrangement in a particular office. By themselves, HOO does not have a delegated financial power. They are a signing authority, mostly for most office orders, etc. And what we are thinking now is that maybe Sajwanji can come in as HOO. I'm just checking if there is any technical issue there. But after Rajpalji, maybe he can just be the head of office. Sorry, yeah, back to you, Paresh.
Thank you so much, sir, for the clarification. Definitely, Rouhani, I think one of the reforms that is being thought about in the administrative services is leveraging this sub-delegation of power so that we have more faster, effective decision making. So, without getting into there, what you see on the screen here, and this is part of the manual for procurement of consultancy and other services. This talks about delegation of financial powers, and here it distinguishes between, and here it's the approval authority. It's not the signing authority per se, but it's the approval authority itself. So for a minister in charge, and for in case of Niti Aayog, we'll talk about it. It's basically the vice chairman, Niti Aayog. He has full powers for any kind of contracting that we need to do. So there's no threshold or ceiling per se. But when it comes to secretary of a particular department, in our case, it's CEO Niti Aayog, for open or limited tender contracts up to a limit of 20 crores can be approved by him. For a single tender contract, which is where we talk about the nomination basis route, is basically the threshold there is 5 crores. And for agreements or contracts for technical collaboration and consultancy services, the threshold here is 2 crores. So that's basically the delegation of financial powers and rules. And you can this is basically just an extract from them, and there are further more details, rules, signing authority, approval authority distinction in that specific document. I just wanted to share this for everybody's reference. Okay, any more questions before we get on to today's agenda? Okay, so quickly jumping onto today's agenda, we will be covering, as I said, guidelines for engagement of knowledge institutions for monitoring and evaluation studies, also called as MEST 2021. So before we get there, let's quickly recap of what are the objectives of TMU. So we are talking about data-driven policy making. We are talking about enabling a culture of deep learning from regular self-evaluation in all tiers of the government. We are also talking about rigorous tracking, monitoring of performance metrics, comprehensive program evaluations, with the new introductions of metrics teams like Time, COE, and others. We are also talking about using cutting-edge technologies and data analytic tools like the survey CAPI tools and so on and so forth for real-time monitoring of government programs. We also strive to keep collecting, providing data and tools for driving effectiveness, efficiency of government programs. Last but not the least, we are also looking at identifying weaknesses and bottlenecks. The reason I put this on the slide is because this objectives is what drives our guidelines for engaging knowledge institutions on any of the 6 activities. So what is this program that we're talking about, and why is it called a program? So basically, what we want to do through this program is we want to engage more and more with knowledge institutions to stimulate them, encourage them, also build capacity between them, whatever is needed to develop to achieve the developmental objectives. And for our matter, we're talking about monitoring and evaluation as a purpose. So as the DMU, we are focused on aligning our whatever tasks and activities we do. It's basically drawn from the cabinet resolution dated January 2015. Again, the mandate around monitoring and evaluation is given to TMU. From this particular scheme or program, what we're trying to do is we want to fund quality research works, also enrich the knowledge base of TMU in the relevant fields and directions. There are certain set of specified subjects and topics which are mentioned in this particular program, which can also be funded through this scheme. So what exactly is this scheme? So this scheme basically was drawn on lines of research scheme of Niti Aayog, which is still there. This is also one of the budget line item under Niti Aayog or Ministry of Planning. This particular research scheme of Niti Aayog is drafted so as to enable the Niti verticals to undertake more and more knowledge and research studies. It lays down the principles of procurement for them. It lays down principles of evaluation, eligibility, and also provides in certain forms and templates. Now, one logical question is that, when there is elaborate GFR, when there are elaborate manual for consultancy and other services, why do we need a specific document? Again, picking up some set of content, certain set of details from the same document and, carving out a separate document out of it. So it's important to understand that there are two specific reasons why we have a scheme or a program. One, it details down more guiding principles. It details down specific activities and procedures, which probably might not be covered in the manual for consultancy or in GFR. Second, often the GFR and manual gives us some leeway or exemptions or gives us an alternatives that you may do 1, 2, 3, or 4. What this guidelines is supposed to do is make it more specific, more black and white, and in the context of the Niti Aayog or in the context of DMU, make it more specific. So with that objective in mind, this guidelines were drafted. The other major benefit of having a set of guidelines is we do not want to go to IFT or go through an internal approvals process for same set of procedures. So if we have a similar set of procedures to be followed for the same set of studies, the idea is if we can in advance get the minimum set of guidelines approved by IFT, then thereafter the IFT or other approvals that are needed can only be done on the changes that we have made or the set of specific details that have been entered into the document. So the idea of these guidelines is also to agree with IFT and other departments within DMU, NITI Aayog on a minimum set of procedures, guidelines to be followed for similar set of procurement. So with that objective in mind, we came up, the NITI Aayog came up with research scheme way back in 2017. Now, thereafter, DMU being an autonomous body and attached office of NITI Aayog, we thought we should also have our own scheme for monitoring and evaluation, which means we'll have a dedicated budget head, which also means that the guidelines will be agreed. It will be in lines with the government rules and procedures, and it would also help us speed up the approval process thereafter. But then getting into more nitty-gritties, we realized that under the current government procedures, an autonomous body cannot have a scheme. Schemes are reserved largely for ministries and departments, and hence we agreed on a term program and not a scheme. But even if it is called a program, it is in all forms and means includes all the specifics of a scheme. So the EFC SSC proposals that you have been looking for, this is very much similar to that, which lays down the guidelines, the budget limit, the procedures, and the expectations from this particular program. So with that context, this particular program was drafted. The second thing that I wanted to bring into perspective here is because this was the first time we were drafting certain set of guidelines, we have mirrored our guidelines exactly to research scheme of NITI Aayog. So if you compare both documents, they are 95-98% similar. The different 2 to 5% probably is basically just, wherever DMU specific details around monitoring and evaluation were to be added, those were updated. And the second major change, and we'll talk about in subsequent slides, is the RSNA, the research scheme of NITI Aayog, allows solicited proposals and unsolicited proposals as well. Unsolicited is where the authority is asking for a proposal. Unsolicited is even without asking, the knowledge institution by its own, by suo motu, submit a proposal to particular to the authority. So that is what research scheme of NITI Aayog allows. It allows unsolicited proposals as well. But keeping into perspective the requirements of DMU, we thought we do not need this provision around unsolicited proposals, and that is something that you'll not see in MASD 2021. But largely, I wanted to bring this into perspective of everyone that this is exactly in lines with research scheme of NITI Aayog, but modified, customized to the requirements of DMU. Just one caveat there, because we are following exactly research scheme of NITI Aayog, there could be some areas which still have some scope for improvement. The idea is first to get this first version out, and when we revise these guidelines, there are certain set of clauses that we'll keep updating as we gather more experience. For that example, when we rolled out this MASD 2021, the limit on the threshold on the limited tender was 25 lakh rupees, but now that has become 50 lakh rupees. So in our revision of these guidelines, we would want to update that particular clause as well. So that's a brief overview of why we needed MASD 2021. And in subsequent slides, we will cover the specifics of this guidelines. Any questions?
Harish, actually, I have a slightly general question. That how is this different from the RFP that we are working on? Because that is also for working with knowledge institutions.
Sure, Bhavna. So RFP is for a specific requirement that we are doing, and empanelment is basically where we are going to shortlist a certain set of institutions. So those come up with criteria for evaluation, the scope of services, approach is all defined there. But when it comes to MESD 2021, this is more like a broad level guidelines. It does not get into large level of operational details. Like it will talk about you would want to empanel institutions under you. Now the procedures for empanelment is something that the scheme or the guidelines will not cover. That has to be subsequent operationalization by the respective authority. So whenever we launch a scheme, it will talk on a very broad level that they want to do step 1, 2, 3, 4. Thereafter, there could be some procedures, rules that the particular ministry or department may roll out. And thereafter, you will have subsequent SOPs for each of the steps. So look at it as a process. We agreed on MESD 2021, which allows us to do empanelment, which allows us to do limited tender. Now, the next step is, now that it allows us to do empanelment, we have to get this list of institutions empaneled. And this RFP is actually a follow-up to MESD 2021, where we are now trying to empanel these institutions, which will work under the broad framework of those guidelines. So guidelines are more a framework, and what you're doing RFP is detailing out one particular element of that framework.
Thanks, Paresh. That clarification helps. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions? Okay, so coming on to this program, and I'll stop calling it scheme thereafter. So this particular program allows us to do 3 specific activities in the context of hiring of professional services. We can conduct monitoring and evaluation studies and related surveys. We can also conduct a comprehensive desk-based research, something that does not require field survey. And the third one is it also allows us to do training and sensitization programs within the broad framework of the program objectives. So program objectives is what I had covered in the previous slide. These are the program objectives. So as far as it's between the objectives of the program and within the objectives of TMU, we can also organize training and sensitization programs. So this particular framework that is now agreed with the IFT is also approved by the competent authority, now allows us to do these 3 activities, and we have some sort of a blanket approval on that. Now, coming on to specifics of this particular guidelines, I would want to spend some more time on just talking about different modes of procurement, because I've seen in the past sessions we had a lot of questions around these different modes of procurement. So this particular MESD 2021 guidelines, and I'm going to walk you through the document probably immediately after this slide. But this particular guidelines is based on 3 different modes of award of projects. What are these 3 different modes of award of projects? One is you can award a project through open tender advertisement route. Second one, you can do it through a limited tender route. And third is you can do through a consultancy by nomination or a single source contract route. What does each of this mean? Open tender process is where anyone and everyone can participate, which means you have not put any restrictions on who can submit proposals. As far as a certain set of institutions fulfill the eligibility conditions of that RFP, that institution can apply for the RFP. So there is pretty much no entry criteria for shortlisting of institutions. Anyone and everyone can submit their proposals. That's called an open tender route, and based on GFR rules, now we have moved totally to e-procurement, and this is done through CPP portal, Central Public Procurement Portal. The next route we have is consultancy by empanelment, which is a limited tender route. What we do in a limited tender route is we reach out for proposals to a specific set of institutions. Now, to reach to this set of institutions, if the most likely the authority would have already done empanelment, or would have some list put together through some formal, informal inquiries, which means a set of organizational appraisal is already done. So that whenever we talk about 2-stage, that stage 1 is already done. What we're talking about here is the stage 2, where we reach out to this limited set of institutions identified through whatever route, through empanelment, formal, informal inquiries, or those institutions where we have signed SOI, MOU with, whatever that route could be. What we believe is that set of institutions are already qualified. Now it's a matter of probably a limited technical evaluation and probably just get the financial quotes and award the study. The idea is to save time and probably also award this project faster to get very immediate results. The third one is consultancy by nomination, where we nominate one specific organization to do that study for us. So this does not take into consideration going through a set of institutions, finalizing going through a technical financial proposal through them or through an open tender process. This is just talking about one institution identified who has the expertise, has the capacity to deliver their project, and we get the work done by them. Specific clauses around when, how, where you can do this single source nomination will be covered in subsequent slides. But that's a broad differentiation between the three modes of procurement we are looking at. So when do we do what kind of procurement? Okay, so now with the relaxation or the exemption, increase in exemption limit given by Department of Expenditure, anything which is less than 50 lakh rupees or up to rupees 50 lakhs can be awarded through a limited tender process. Above 50 lakh rupees, we have to go through an open tender process through CPP portal. And for consultancy by nomination, as far as we are in compliance with the rules and procedures of award through a single source selection or a nomination basis, as far as we are in compliance of those rules and procedures, there's actually no financial limit on what level of projects can be awarded through nomination basis. As far as, again, it's under the broad framework of financial powers, delegation of financial powers that we're talking about. So when Rohani had posted that question in the table that I've shown across, the secretary in its own limit can actually approve an open tender contracts up to 20 crore rupees. For limited tender contracts, we spoke about 5 crore rupees. For engagement with consultancy firms, it's around 2 crore rupees. So that's the limit of secretary's approval. That holds true for nomination basis as well. And similarly, for minister level rank, absolutely there's no financial limit per se. So that's as far as it's under that thresholds, it can be approved by the respective authority. What you see on the right in the gray is an abridged process that we are talking about, and I'll again talk about this in far more details. When it comes to open tender process, the contours of the RFP, the contours of the TORs have to be approved by the member and VC Niti Aayog. What our study recommends is the MESD 2021 for open tender advertisement inquiries. It recommends that we follow a two-stage process. Stage 1, we do expression of interest. Stage 2, we do a QCBS evaluation of 70:30. For limited tender process, considering they are of smaller scales, the guidelines is the authority here, and which is GMO, can shortlist minimum 3 organizations, shared TOR approach for the RFP. The institutes thereafter have to submit a financial proposal. So keep in mind here that when we have already empaneled, prepared this shortlist, the organizational appraisal in a form is already done. So here, the MESD 2021, as per the guidelines, says we can go ahead with just asking for financial proposal and award the project based on the lowest cost. For consultancy by nomination, we need to record the full justification why we are doing the single source selection. This has to be recorded in the e-file. This has to be approved by the competent authority. This particular, the competent authority in this case is TECCN, which is Technical Evaluation Committee for Consultancy by Nomination. So I'll talk about who this committee is and what does it constitute of. So this particular committee has the authority to approve any consultancy by nomination as far as it's in the broad framework of MESD 2021. And thereafter, we can award the project after TECCN approval. So that's the MESD 2021 guidelines on a single page. We will talk about each of these blocks in far more details in subsequent slides. But at this point in time, if any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, ready to answer them now.
Parish, we have a question from Deepak. He's asking what is the difference between open tender with MESD and open tender like the ones of UCSs and OMS?
Okay. So as I said, what we have done is in MESD 2021, we have mirrored RSA in 2021 as is. So this framework that you see on the slide is actually the framework being recommended for research studies of Niti Aayog. So while we got this done, because we thought there's a precedent and we will get easy approvals on this. But in the next iteration, so now if we have MESD 2021 and if we are looking to revise these guidelines in MESD 2022, we might have to address a lot of contradictions that we have in this guidelines versus the process that we follow. And let me talk about those contradictions, since Deepak has already pointed out here. So while MESD 2021 talks about consultancy through advertisement through a two-stage process, and this is what even GFR says, but in real terms, what we are actually doing is we are following an abridged process, which is stage 1 and stage 2 combined. And this is done on the lines of model RFP and UCSS evaluations that we have done. So in real spirit, this clauses will now have to be revised, saying that stage 1, stage 2 now have been combined based on model RFP, based on our learnings from the past. And the revised process now is so and so, which means we will go through a one stage, single stage, two envelope process, ask for technical financial proposals. The technical proposal itself includes the EOI also in a way, and the scoring on those technical proposals. So, so to answer your question, Deepak, yes, they are different. Today, what we do is an abridged process, open tender RFP abridged process, where we do not go through an EOI stage. EOI is in a way also already clubbed under stage 2, which is when we do QCBS evaluations, we are actually opening it up to all organizations. And we have very good clarity on, generally EOIs are done when you do not have very good clarity on terms of reference, where you want to have discussions, deliberations before you finalize the TORs. But in our case, evaluation studies, we have largely standardized it and templatize it. So that allows us some exemption from conducting EOIs. We can directly do that as part of the technical proposal stage. So you're right, there is a contradiction. And in subsequent revisions, iterations of MESD guidelines, we need to probably start addressing these contradictions, which means this has to be revised to an abridged process. Also, certain templates and forms that we use are dated. The MESD 2021 is slightly dated. We have far more detailed templates in our open tender RFP templates, so we can start using that. So Deepak, does it answer query, or did I confuse you more?
Thanks, Paresh. Thanks, okay. Paresh, you have answered.
Okay. Similarly, for limited tender process as well, while the limited tender says, you have already gone through an organizational appraisal stage, you do not need to go through asking for technical proposals. But somebody from the evaluations team can also ask a question here, saying that when we actually did limited tender studies for the 9 schemes under recommendations by DOE, we actually went through a far more stringent process. We actually did an EOI also with this limited set of institutions. We actually asked them for a technical proposal, and then we went ahead with financial proposal. So that is, again, a tweaking. We are trying to see that while the minimum set of guidelines is to just ask for financial proposal, to safeguard our interest, and at the same time, because this was the first time we were reaching out to this 32-hour institutions, we thought it is also required that we check for their interest levels. That is why we had an EOI. And also check for their competency and capability levels, which is why we had a technical proposal. Again, we did not score those technical proposals. Scoring was not done because the guidelines does not allow us to do that. What we are looking at largely is responsiveness, whether they meet the requirements that we're asking for. It's more yes and no. So keeping those things in consideration, we have also tweaked our limited tender process. We are also learning, we are making some more modifications. So again, whenever we release these guidelines again in the subsequent years, this particular set of procedures for limited tenders can also be revised based on whatever works best for DMO. So what we're going to cover in subsequent slides is more what MESD 2021 permits us to do. And thereafter, I also try to cover if we have made some modifications or we have added some additional steps more just to safeguard our interests. Yeah, Ruhani, go ahead.
Why does these guidelines deviate from the model RFP?
Okay, so one thing, the guidelines do not actually are deviations from GFR or model RFP. Model RFP probably is far more detailed. It takes it to a next step. Model RFP is also recommended for, it was actually recommended for PPP projects. We did it for our consulting because the size of assignment itself is 2.5 crores and above, which means we need to make sure that every single clause is well thought through and is covered in the agreement and is covered in the RFP. But when it comes to smaller set of projects, let's say 40 lakhs, 50 lakh rupees, probably certain set of conditions can be removed. because more clauses, more conditions, more restrictions often lead to also complexity. It might also discourage some players from applying. So it's also a trade-off. How much detail? You can also have a 1,000-page RFP document which has all the clauses, but then the problem is, will we have enough interest? So it's a trade-off there. Number of conditions, clauses versus participation versus cost of the RFP. So that's why what we see here, advertisement is a more broader view. Do EOI, do QCBS, and model RFP is just another way of doing procurement.
So here under open tender through advertisement, so EOI is mandatory.
EOI is, yes, mandatory. What model RFP did is it clubbed EOI with technical proposal. So what we are calling there is, instead of doing it a two-stage selection process, we said we'll do it single stage selection process, but there it's an abridged one, which means EOI and technical proposal are sought at the same time. EOI is what? Basically, you are expressing your interest for a particular project, which is your form number 1. Letter of proposal is nothing but expressing your interest to take that project. The only difference here between a two-stage and a single stage is, in a two-stage, what happens is, between the two stages, you also have a round of deliberations and discussions with the interested institutions. The reason you have these deliberations is because probably you're not too sure what should go into the RFP. In case of single stage, because we are so clear on the expectations, we are clear on the terms of reference, we know the methodology that we need to find, we can afford to combine these two stages. That's why we call it as an abridged selection process. It helps us save time. That's it.
And Paresh, in the GFR, it was written that if the cost of consulting is more than 25 lakhs, then EOI is mandatory.
Yes. So again, model RFP, we are not saying we are doing away with EOI. We are all we are trying to say is the EOI is clubbed under the proposal submission process itself. So the two stages are clubbed. We are not saying stage 1 is not followed altogether. Stage 1 is followed, but it is clubbed with stage 2 to save time.
So under open tender, so why didn't we ask for EOI for this national solar mission that we floated recently?
Very good question. So let's say, let's look at the other alternative. Let's say under National Solar Mission, we could have asked for EOIs. So we publish a certain set of indicative terms of reference. We get the EOI. We get EOI, let's say, from 15, 20 odd institutions. Thereafter, what you do is you then start sharing the final terms of reference. You might also share the entire RFP with them and ask them to submit technical proposals. And then financial proposals and thereafter. So are we conducting any deliberations, discussions with them between the two stages? Not, because we are very well versed with this domain. We know how evaluations have to be done. So probably we would not have conducted any deliberations with them. So between the two procedures that we're talking about, one is an abridged selection where stage 1 and stage 2 are combined, versus one where we have split it. The example that you're saying, stage 1 first and then stage 2. We have actually, we would have lost 1 month.
Yeah, Paresh, but isn't it a procedural violation of GFR, because there's no budget ceiling as such? And GFR clearly says if the cost of consulting is more than 25 lakhs, ask for EOI. And we haven't asked.
Okay, I think you're getting into semantics there. Asking for EOI. Are you saying as part of the 2 RFPs that we circulated, we haven't asked for EOI? Is that what you're implying?
Yes.
And what I'm trying to say is, as part of the procedures, even in a single stage, we have asked them for expressing their interest. So it actually inviting tenders, and one step there it says you expressing interest in this particular RFP. And if you are interested, also submit your technical and financial proposals at this very same stage.
So
that is what we are saying.
Kind of ask for EOI, that means.
Yes. So that is compliance of GFR. All I'm saying is both stages have been combined. If you are interested, give your proposals immediately, versus if you would have a 2-stage process, you would have said we will held a round of discussions and then ask for proposals. So that's the difference between the two.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Right? So again, I'm repeating the word. What we're talking about is an abridged selection process to save time. And other thing is we are very clear on the procedures, the framework, the principles to be followed, and we do not really need deliberations because we have already mastered it over time. Shweta, would you like to add anything here? Because you also, similar discussions were held when we were discussing UCSS के लिए क्या model follow करें?
So in that we had very clear directions that in order to save time, because procurement is a time-consuming process, it's always better to follow a single stage process. And I think you've addressed the rest of the points, so no addition there.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Shweta. Any more questions, Maitreyi? Or any follow-up questions from Rohani?
Yeah, so we have a question from Nikita Arora, and
Yeah.
she's asking that is there any budget criteria to select agency from the empaneled survey institutions?
Can you repeat that question? Budget ceiling? for-
Yeah, so hi.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah,
just
please.
come in here? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So so I was just asking that when we select, for example, in case of limited tender, we say that when the budget of the study is less than 50 lakh, then we can go for this route. So is there any budget criteria for selecting the agency from this impaneled institutions of survey list, which has recently come in?
Okay. So this ceiling that you see here is on the cost of the project. So cost of the study itself. If the study is less than 50 lakh rupees, you can go through this route, consultancy by empanelment. Now, once you have finalized that you have to go through a limited tender process, then the next step is about shortlisting institutions. Now that shortlisting can be done on various criteria that I'll cover in subsequent slides. And one of the criteria is you can fall back on the empaneled institutions. So in our case, if I was doing a survey that would cost me 45 lakh rupees, I can follow a limited tender process and I can invite all the empaneled institutions to do that study for me. I also have an option that if the study is to be done in Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra, I go to only those institutions which have capacity to do that survey in those two states. So probably out of those 28 institutions, let's say only 15 have capacities to do survey in Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra, then I can go only to those 15 institutions. But that criteria happens at the shortlisting stage. But in terms of budget, budget does not decide कि amongst the 28 institutions मुझे कौन से institution के पास जाना चाहिए. You have to go to all.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Right. Any other questions?
Vijender had also raised his. So Vijender, would you like to answer?
Yeah, Vijender, please go ahead.
Hi, Paresh. Yeah. Actually, मैं EOI के रेफरेंस में अपना कुछ एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करना चाह रहा था. जैसे आपने कहा कि यूजुअली जब हम अपना टेंडर फ्लोट करते थे प्राइवेट सेक्टर के अंदर, तो बेसिकली EOI और हम RFI रिक्वेस्ट फॉर इंफॉर्मेशन का बेसिकली पहले यूज करते थे. तो फर्स्ट स्टेज में हम रिक्वेस्ट फॉर इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लोट करते थे, जिसके अंदर हम ये देखना चाहते थे कि किस तरह का मार्केट एबिलिटी है, मार्केट कैपेसिटीज है, एंड वी वर नॉट श्योर कि कोई ये काम करना चाहेगा नहीं चाहेगा, और मार्केट की क्या एबिलिटी डिफरेंट काम करने के लिए. फॉर एग्जांपल, जैसे हमने फॉर्म 7 शेयर किया था जिसके अंदर हमने कैपी का रिक्वायरमेंट पूछा था, तो हम लोग बेसिकली रिक्वेस्ट फॉर इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लोट किया करते थे. आफ्टर दैट EOI का हम यूज करते थे. बेसिकली EOI हम तब यूज करते थे या तो हमें अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं है कि हमें अपनी स्टडी कैसे करनी है और एक ब्रॉड आइडिया हमने फ्लोट कर दिया, या हमें क्लियर ऑब्जेक्टिव है कि हमें ये करना है, ये स्टडी करनी है, बट मार्केट में ऐसे कौन से सप्लायर हैं जो वो स्टडी करने में इच्छा रखते हैं. अदरवाइज बहुत सारे लोग अप्लाई कर देंगे, L1 के हिसाब से हमें उनको देना पड़ सकता था. तो इसलिए हम EOI फ्लोट करते थे, उनका इंटरेस्ट देखते थे, उनसे कंसेप्ट मंगाते थे और ये देखते थे कि क्या उनकी एबिलिटी है या नहीं है. वंस वी हैव एन EOI, उसके बाद हम जाते थे RFP के ऊपर या RFT के ऊपर, हम तब प्रोसेस फॉलो करते थे. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Vijender. And actually, that's exactly the process that we have to follow for our limited tender studies. This limited tender studies does not say कि आपको EOI करना है, but exactly for the reasons that Vijender mentioned, कि जो हमारे 32 institutions थे और then other lists सब कुछ मिला के we had 60 odd names. We did not know कि किसके पास, because this all list was dated 2017. हमें ये नहीं पता था कि पहले तो ये लोग interested है भी कि नहीं. If they are interested, do they even have capacities and capabilities or not? So that's the reason we had to actually do an EOI at that stage. And from that EOI, we also had to ask for technical proposal and financial proposal. So while these are still work in progress procedures, Ruhani, we are still trying to understand what works best for us. But yes, this is all still in compliance with GFR. We are not violating any procedures at any point in time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Do you have any follow-up question for Vijender? Or
no, he explained it quite well. Thanks, Vijender.
Okay, cool.
Paresh, I think Himanshu had also raised it. So
yeah, Himanshu, please. Yeah, Himanshu, please go ahead.
Yes, Parish, I wanted to know whether in GFR rules or in MESD guidelines, is there a provision where we are rating the service provided by any of the agency which has been awarded the contract? So, for example, if we are satisfied with the quality of the deliverables, do we provide them a rating out of 10? If we are dissatisfied or the agency did not perform as it was expected, then we can go towards backlisting the agency, but not going to that extent, but providing a rating for each of its each of the projects that it is executing, and then later on utilizing that rating for awarding the upcoming RFPs. Is there a provision, or can this be done?
Himanshu, that's actually a brilliant question, and this is a practice that is often followed in award of projects under corporate sector. And what you're calling about is performance-based payment. And ideally, the terms and conditions are there's a certain set of amount which is given as fixed, and there's a certain amount which is variable. And variable could be based on milestones, could be based on deliverables, and could also be based on ratings. So I have had cases where, the steering committee, which includes the CEOs, CXOs, they gave us a rating on scale of 10, kitna mila hai. So if I got 6 of 10 on average, I get only 60% of the variable pay. The 40% of the variable pay is forfeited. So that's an excellent way to ensure that the consulting firm delivers to its requirements and to the satisfaction of the authority. So that's the practice being followed in private sector. Now, coming to your question, Himanshu, do we have any such provisions in our RFP? So as where it stands today, I think there isn't a scale. There isn't a scale when I say scale from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10. Here the scale is binary, 0 or 1. What we are saying is you are asked to submit a draft inception report. If we like it, we give you 30% or 20%, whatever is that payment milestone. If you do not like it, go back. You have to incorporate those comments and come back to us, and then we give you the rest of the entire amount, 20%. If you do not give us to the satisfaction of the authority, which means if you do not get 10 on 10, you're not eligible for any payment. So it's either full 20% or it's 0%. So linking of payments to deliverables is what we have done. And the rating here is 10 on 10 or 0 on 10. It's not a continuous scale here. And then there is also a provision for getting consultants, getting feedback for the consultants. So Shweta can talk about her experience where all the 10 consulting firms that we had appointed for doing our 10 studies, wahan pe we had at various points in the project, we asked our nodal officers to rate the firms, how well they are doing. So we also engage in constant conversations with the consultants, say that, look, our team feels that your performance is 5 on 10. You need to push yourselves so that you reach the quality that we are looking for. So that's the provision that we have so far. We have deliverables linked payments. The rating of services that we are doing is 0 or 1. And third is we do have a continuous feedback process. And now what you're talking about, Himanshu, we can, in subsequent RFPs, we could have this provision where it's not still clear 0 and 1. Inception report milna. It's easy to say that is it delivered or not. It's tangible, but in some cases we might need this provision of rating on a continuous scale. For that example, let's say website RFP. I think website RFP may, if you're talking about content development, just 0 and 1 content de diya cannot be the only criteria. We can also look at the quality of the content, or for that matter, we can also link it to hit rates on our website. If it is in this range, we give you full 100%. If it is here, we can give you 90%, 80%, and so forth. So yes, Himanshu, you are thinking on very right lines. I'm actually happy to have you on the procurement team. We can have similar provisions in our RFP. Himanshu, does that answer your query?
Yes. Thanks, Paresh.
Okay. Maitri, any more questions?
No, Paresh, not
okay.
Nothing.
Good. So we'll quickly go on to the next slides. I think since we have discussed so much in details in the previous slides, the other slides probably will be more run through.
I had a question.
Yeah, Mihir, please go ahead. I'm going to move back to my previous slide. Yeah.
Empaneled institutes, do we have any sunset clause as to when they could be revised or any of those that sort?
Yeah. Thanks, Mihir, for pointing that question. Definitely, I think that is one learning we have from our previous empanelment. So for all of you who do not know this, DMO had actually done an empanelment exercise in 2017. So we do have a list of, if I'm not mistaken, 50 plus institutions. Now the problem with that empanelment is it does not have a sunset clause. So till date, we have still received queries saying that, look, we got empaneled with DMO in 2017. We are eligible to be for this limited tender. Why did you not allow us? So that's the problem. Every empanelment should have a sunset clause. So for our empanelment of survey institutions, the tenure of the empanelment is 3 years plus 2 years. So extendable for additional 2 years, but 1 year at a time. So if you are happy with the performance of that institution, and if we can come up with some objective rating like Himanshu is talking about, if we can rate the services of the survey institution on a scale of 10 and say criteria is anybody who has scored more than 7 or 8 can actually be eligible for renewal. So we can do that for additional 2 years, 1 year at a time. So maximum 5 years is the tenure for our empanelment of survey institutions. We are proposing similar thing for knowledge institutions as well. And similarly, different empanelment list from RBI, IIPS, or from Ministry of Tourism. They might all have different tenure limits, but it should be mentioned in the RFP and the empanelment list when it got circulated. Mihir, does that answer query?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll go to I'll talk about each of these modes of procurement in far more detail. So first thing I'm covering is open tender process. Again, this is as per the guidelines from monitoring and evaluation studies. We followed what RSNA had mentioned, but it also allows us, if you want to follow model RFP, we can go through the model RFP route as well. So this is more indicative from a guidelines perspective. What guidelines says is 70-30 weightage, and the 70% for technical is broken across this 5 elements. The parameters are more or less similar to what we have in model RFP. Key personnel, then you have experience of the applicant. We are talking about capability of knowledge transfer and need of this study. So this is where in our model RFP, this is under understanding of terms of reference, methodology and work plan part. Chapterization, contents and layout, in a way we cover it in the methodology, but in RSNA and in our MESD 2021, there's dedicated 5 marks given to this. And last is overall work plan and use of statistical design getting 30 marks. So this is scoring criteria that is prescribed by MESD 2021. There's a set of criteria prescribed by model RFP, and there's also a set of criteria that manual for consultancy also provides. So all in all, if you look at the broad breakup, they largely remain same. The range also remains same. So we have the flexibility to follow any of them. The whole open tender process is done under the supervision of a technical evaluation committee. From MESD 2021 perspective. So the MESD, the broader framework that we're talking about this particular program, the TEC may consist of chairperson, where the chairperson is DG DMU, Director General DMU, and the committee members. We suggest that there'll be 3 committee members, advisor of the concerned subject vertical or division. So the example that Ruhani was talking about, National Solar Mission, in that case, it should be Rajnath Ram sir, who is current advisor for energy vertical. So he becomes a part of the TEC. Advisor PEMT. So in this case, we have Anurag Goyal sir currently, and the last one is Director Finance, Dr. Santosh Kumar ji. One learning, and this is what I would suggest everyone to be cognizant of, whenever you seek approval from competent authority on any committee or any delegation of power or responsibility or activity to a certain set of individuals, I would suggest to use designation-based delegation, not name-based delegation. So I'm going to repeat. If I have to ask CEO sir for approval of technical evaluation committee for National Solar Mission, I will not name the person. I will not say Rajnath Ram sir should be part of the committee. I would say advisor energy vertical should be part of the committee. And I'll tell you the reason here. What happens is a lot of our procurement processes and the thereafter delivery of the projects run over months and years together. In that duration, it could be possible that one or the two, someone or the other may be replaced, may be substituted, or somebody else takes up that role. In that case, we do not need to go back to CEO sir for approval. Thereafter, all we need to do is whoever takes up that particular set of responsibilities automatically becomes part of the TEC. So one very small point here, but it might help you save 3 or 4 days in going back to CEO sir for approval. So we suggest that whenever you take approval on committee, do it based on designations and not by names. So before I go on to the limited tender process, any questions regarding open tender per se? Okay. Coming to limited tender process, and I'm going to read out what is there in the MESD guidelines. What we actually did is something that we'll cover in session 5th. But for now, we'll just read out what the guidelines expect us to do. So guidelines, the first thing expects us to do is identify specific organizations, institutions based on a pre-qualification criteria, which would lead to a preparation of a long list of potential consultants and panel of institutions. So this identifying of list, if you have empanelment done, then this list is ready. If you haven't done empanelment, then you might actually do some formal, informal inquiries with the ministries, departments, chambers of commerce, etc., and get this list ready. Coming back to you, Ruhani, if you do not have that list and you do not have any options from any of the ministries, then you can actually do an EOI. That's exactly what this particular MESD guidelines also allow us to do. You can have this shortlisting done through a formal or an informal route. So once the list of institutions is identified, for the next stage to seek proposals, DMU has to identify which institutions are eligible, are competent, are capable enough to do that particular RFP for you. So you can pick up as many as you want, but the manual says between 3 to 8. So minimum 3, maximum 8. But we can reach out to more institutions as this is more preferred, recommended, but not mandatory. So the 8 part is still open. You can reach out to the way we did for limited tender studies. We reach out to 60 institutions. So you can reach out to as many institutions as far as they meet the criteria, but minimum limit there is 3. Once communication has been made, the institutions will have to submit the financial proposal. As I said, the listing itself means that that organization is qualified, so you do not have to actually go and ask technical proposals. You can straight away ask for financial proposals. So just running into example, let's say Vijender, for your study on street children or deprived children for Delhi, if you want to do a survey, now we already have an empaneled list of survey institutions. Based on that and based on who have worked in this space in Delhi in the past, we can actually finalize, pick up maximum 28 because that's the empanelment list, or you can restrict yourself to only 3 and immediately ask them for financial proposal. You don't even have to go to IFT for approval now because IFT has already agreed to this set of requirements, this set of guidelines. And as far as it is less than 50 lakh rupees, we can actually float the request, get the proposals, and then thereafter go to IFT and COSER for approval. So that's the power of these guidelines and the empanelment that we have done. We now can actually bring down the whole procurement process to as low as 2 weeks. Now, once the financial proposals have been submitted, IFT and GFI allow request us to at least give them 21 days to submit financial proposals. But if you have, if you are time bound, and if all the institutions who are participating in the RFP agree to the 2-week limit or a 1-week limit as well, you can do that. As far as you are not restricting competition, you can play with that time because this is a limited tender process. Based on Rule 193 of GFR 2017, the lowest L1 bidder. So in your case, Vijender, if you at all float that survey, you can ask for financial proposals, give them 2 weeks time. Based on whoever has the lowest cost, you can send a file to IFT COSER for approval and go ahead award that contract. It specifically says that because this guidelines say that technical bids would not be required and shall be awarded by TEC on the basis of lowest financial bid. Now, there is one catch in the guidelines, and as I said, we need to keep improvising on these guidelines going forward. So some of these statements and words need to be rephrased. It is very clearly saying, states that the project has to be awarded to responsive, technically qualified proposal. Now, if you're only asking for financial proposals, how do we make sure that that particular institution is technically responsive? Which means only when they submit a technical proposal can we say they are technically responsive. So that's a little contradiction in the language. So this is something that we can address in subsequent iterations, where we can actually say that there could be, we can ask them for technical proposal, but technical proposal will be more a responsiveness check, yes or no. We will not score them. We'll still go ahead with lowest bidder L1 selection-based route. What you see on slide 16 is a modified version of those guidelines. So guidelines give us the broad framework. The detailed steps is something that we put together and then we got it approved by IFT and CEO. And thereafter, we have now already floated 9 studies following these guidelines. So while the guidelines does not require us to do EOI, does not require us to do technical proposals, we actually, because this was the first time we were doing it, we actually made it a very foolproof process. Instead of coming up with our own shortlist, we said we'll go through an EOI process to get our shortlist. So step 2 is there. So the evaluation team prepared the scope of work of the study. Then thereafter, we invited EOI from the 60 institutions. From there, whoever had expressed their interest. So at some places we got 9 institutions expressing interest, some places 3 institutions. So whoever expressed interest, we asked them to submit their proposal. So we shared our RFP containing the TOR and asked them for proposals. When we asked them for proposals, we said they will have to submit technical proposal. So in our previous slide, I showed you there is a clause that says technically responsive proposal. So that's why we asked them for technical proposal, Annexure 2. Financial proposal, Annexure 3. This is given in the guidelines. And some supporting required documents, PAN card, bank details, and so on and so forth as per para 9 of the guidelines. So this is what the institutions submitted to us. And then we followed the TEC, and TEC nominated a subcommittee where the first step they did was they looked at the technical proposals and concluded whether they were responsive or not. And if they were responsive, they were taken to the next stage of financial proposals, and these studies were awarded to the lowest cost. And now we are at a stage where we have commissioned all of those 9 studies. Most of the studies have reached the inception report stage, and hopefully we'll complete them in the next 3 months. Any question on consultancy by empanelment, the second mode of procurement? Maitri, anything on the chat box?
No, Parish, nothing on the chat box.
I want to circle back to the questions that Bhavna and probably Ruhani also indicated at the start. while this is the process that we followed for the award of the first 9 studies, is this the process that we will follow for the subsequent limited tender studies? The answer could be yes, could be no, or could be maybe. The reason here I'm saying that is once we have our own empanelment list, which means we have gone through our own rigor of scoring them, we have gone through our own rigor of measuring what capacities exist in the various institutions, then probably this whole EOI stage is not needed. We know each institution, we know each of their competencies. So if it was a study in a health sector, we know which institutions have worked in this health sector, and all the information is very recent. So we know these institutions will definitely qualify. For that matter, we have a clause in the empanelment which says that if we reach out to them for a proposal, and if they refuse 2 times in a row or 3 times in a row, then they tend to be disqualified from empanelment. So with that thing, probably this whole EOI stage will go away. We won't need EOI. We can immediately go with the step where we say we will seek request for proposal. Now, the second point around technical proposal, we went ahead with technical proposal as Param was saying, because it was for the first time we were not even sure which institutions will be interested, what is their competencies level. But with the kind of empanelment that we are envisaging, Bhavna, that the point that you were saying, why are we doing empanelment? Once we have done empanelment of knowledge institutions, the technical proposal that we are seeking, if we are already evaluating all of that at the empanelment stage itself, we might actually not even need a technical proposal. Then it is a matter of just asking financial proposal and awarding it based on L1, which is what our MESD 2021 guidelines actually say. All you need is minimum 3 institutions and award it based on financial proposal. So that's where probably we are still experimenting, but the steady state is going back to the MESD guidelines. Yeah, Param, you had something to add?
Paresh, if I may, add something here.
Yeah, Param.
So when we did this limited empanelment, this process for the onboarding, so one thing which I felt which I wanted to share with you also, I had earlier discussed this also with you as well. So I think there is a little bit of an ambiguity in terms of the technical evaluation. There is some ambiguity. So although the MESD guidelines very clearly says that technical evaluation is not required, but it says that technical responsiveness check is required, right? So when the technical responsiveness check is required, so and the definition of responsiveness is not given there, so then there is a kind of a fuzzy area that how do you define responsiveness? And in our case, I think probably it took a longer time because we define responsiveness in a way which also included checking the exact CVs which were given, whether they are aligned or whether they are kind of in line with the requirement of the TORs, where we had defined the requirements of minimum qualifications and work experience, and also there were some other requirements in terms of their past experience and so on and so forth. So although we didn't score it, I am again repeating that, but it almost became a kind of an evaluation of technical evaluation. Although it was on a bundle, right? So I think that created the confusion, and which was also like TEC also kind of suggested and guided us that we since we have now mentioned that in the TOR that these are the requirements, so we have to check the requirements, although it is not required as per the MESD guidelines. So I think that is something I wanted to highlight, which probably created all this issues in the initial days.
Yeah. Fair point, Param, and that's what I was actually present when I was presenting slide 15. I did mention that when we circulate the next set of guidelines, probably this gray area or fuzzy area that you're talking about, we would want to make it more clearer. In what cases will you ask for technical proposals, and in what cases you will not ask for technical proposals? And also, I think a little bit of confusion being for the first time is we do not have our own empanelment list. I think once we have our own empanelment list and we have done our own technical evaluation. So the point that you're talking about, responsive, technically qualified proposal, this is in a way will already be done at the empanelment stage, where we would have already looked at their competencies, training facilities, research publications, competencies, having done work in this area in the past. So once we have done that, I think then it's a matter of probably just asking for financial proposals, or do a very limited technical qualification, which is what you're talking about. Ask them for just, these are the key personnel, share with us 5 CVs. As far as you meet that criteria, you can be awarded the project based on financial proposals. So again, there is a lot of learning from our first set of 9 studies. We are not saying that this is perfect. We will try to keep improving over time. And the biggest jump for us in this area will be the empanelment. That's why we are putting a lot of our focus, efforts, manpower in making sure that we have our own empanelment list, and thereafter a lot of things will get addressed. Maitri, any more questions before we move on to the last mode of selection?
No questions on the chat.
Okay. The third mode of procurement, as recommended by GFR and also now incorporated in MESD 2021 guidelines, is nomination, a single source selection. So here we are saying the proposals shall be strictly on solicited basis. So as I said, the RSNA, the Research Scheme of Niti Aayog, allows unsolicited proposals as well. Unsolicited means we haven't asked for it, but the knowledge institution said that, look, this is where our expertise is, most likely you might need it. So what we are saying is this has to be strictly on solicited basis. The authority should have asked for proposals, then only they will be considered. Now, after we have asked for proposals, there is a certain set of requirement where these proposals can be served through single source selection. And this are those 4 criteria. This is also in lines with GFR. If it's a natural continuation of previous work carried out by the firm, if it's in a case of emergency situation arising after natural disasters. Third, situations which require proprietary techniques or specific consultants, only one consultant having that expertise across the entire nation. In that circumstances, you can do a single source selection. And the last, the authority, DMO Niti Aayog, should feel that organization is most suitable for conducting this study as per the objectives of DMO Niti Aayog. So this is the restrictions, the conditions for considering any study under single source selection. Should be purely on solicited basis, should be in clear compliance of Rule 194 of GFR 2017. Again, the decision for approval of funding under this particular mode of procurement lies with TECCN here, and we can actually consider renaming this to CECCN, like the one that I was talking about last time. Technical Evaluation Committee is a misleading term. It also does financial evaluation in a way, so we can actually rename it in subsequent iteration to consultancy evaluation. But nevertheless, this committee consists of Honorable Vice Chairman at the top, the committee members, honorable members of Niti Aayog, the concerned member for that particular study, CEO Niti Aayog, DG DMO, and Director Finance. So it can have at max 1 plus, if you have 3 members, 4, 5, 6, and 7 members on the committee. The quorum is, it should have minimum 4 members and should be chaired by the Vice Chairman. So any question on consultancy by nomination? While I try to share the MESD 2021 guidelines, how does it look? Any questions so far? Yeah.
Hi, Paresh.
Aditya? Yeah, Aditya, go ahead.
Paresh, so I had a question regarding the limited tendering process. So this also kind of alludes to what Param was saying earlier. And it's also in the context of the list of the empaneled survey institutions that you have shared recently. So essentially, in the new list that you have shared, you have graded the survey institutions. So
Yes.
one, how would that, how can those grades be factored into the selection process? As it is, we already have a very specified selection criteria in the MESD guidelines. And two, whether there is any scope for, as I had asked previously, for sequential soliciting of the technical and the financial bids. Because what we have realized this time during the limited tender is that not to name names, but there are some institutions which qualified based on the technical and financial criteria, however, are proving to be kind of incompetent. Because L1 seems to be the only way to go about this, and you mentioned that there's another process called QCBS. So if that can also be taken into account.
Thanks, Aditya, for this question. So let me answer both questions. So the first one is about using empanelment list. The empanelment list, definitely, yeah. The empanelment list of survey institutions does have grades to it. In addition to the grades, it also talks about the sectors that particular institution has worked in the past. It also talks about the states where they have previous experience. It also qualifies the size of the firm and some more details. Now, the MESD guidelines, and for that matter, GFR 2017 or Manual for Procurement and of Consultancy and Other Services, say that whenever you do a limited tender, you need minimum 3 proposals. Maximum, they say 8, but you can go to a higher number if needed. Now, if I have 28 institutions, do I have an option to reach out to all 28? But probably reaching out to all 28 could have its own disadvantages. It opens up a huge spectrum of institutions for me. Somebody scored 95 versus somebody who has scored 60, 61 as well. So the first thing I would do is, out of those 28 institutions, I will filter down to the set of institutions which have the capability that I'm looking for. So going back to the same example, let's say if I was doing a survey in Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra in health sector, from those 28 institutions, I'll apply those filters. So on sectors, it should be health. On states, it should be Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh. Probably, if I also have a constraint that I want to give it to only small scale or medium MSME, I don't want to give it to a large firm, I can put that filter as well. And this is allowed through GFR. So there is a specific clause. If we can comply to that and give it only to MSME, we can do that. Let's say this list still becomes 12 institutions after applying all these filters, and you feel for a limited tender reaching out to 12, and because it's going to be only lowest financial proposal basis, then we don't want to reach out to 12. I want only 5 institutions. In that case, you can use grade as a criteria. The only reason you do not see marks and you see only grades, because we feel somebody who has scored 71 and 80, that range is still very comparable. So that's why we follow grades. It's very much similar to how grading in schools is being done, schools and colleges are being done in these days. So we do not have the absolute marks, but we do have grades. So let's say out of those 12 firms, I say I want to restrict myself only to grade A and grade B firms, which gives me a list of 6 firms, and then I can go ahead, do a limited tender with those 6 institutions. So basically, the additional criteria, additional fields have been given more to facilitate filtering to get to your list of 3 to 8 institutions that you are looking for. Aditya, does that answer first part of your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. The second part around sequential proposals. The current scenario, or the current example that you gave around one of the limited tender studies, I think we should keep that aside, because it has its own problems, and it has nothing to do with the process. Probably it could more to do with our evaluations or criteria. So let's coming back to the process per se, I think the process is well defined. What we can do is we can strengthen our evaluation steps, evaluation activities, for that matter, even our presentation round. We can further tweak it to make sure that such cases do not happen in the future. Now, specifically answering your question around sequential proposals, I don't know how the sequential proposals could have saved us from the current situation that we are in. The firm may still would have given us technical proposals. The firm would have still qualified based on the information they gave us. Then they would have given us financial proposals. Based on financial proposals, they would have still qualified as L1, and we could have been in the same scenario as we are today. So it has nothing to do with sequential conduct of the procurement process. So as I said, this has to be answered at the evaluation stage. Now, coming on to the sequential, I am reiterating what I said last time. If you're going to seek financial proposals separately. And I'm going to reiterate that if you're going to seek financial proposals separately, then the technical proposals should not carry a score. Because, and I'll try to explain it with an example, let's say you did a technical proposal stage, one firm, and you have to make the results of the technical proposals public. You can't hide the scores. So if one firm scored 100 and the other firm scored 60, but both of them qualified because your threshold was 60 marks, and you make this marks public, and then you ask for financial proposals, there's a huge opportunity and there is a huge possibility that this leads to manipulation of the prices. The firm which scored 100 might escalate its prices. The firm which scored 60 might want to give us an abnormally low bid, even if it is at low profits or zero profit or negative profits. But still, they might want to give a low bid to compete against the one that has scored 100 marks. So we do not want to put ourselves in that scenario. So as I said, you can do sequential proposals, technical and financial proposals. But if you are going to that, please, the technical proposal stage has to be more a qualification criteria, yes or no, but should not have a score to it. And also be mindful that adding additional stage just increases the procurement time. Every stage means you will have to ask them for proposals. Asking them for proposals means you have to give them 21 days of time to submit proposals. So it just adds one more month to the entire procurement process. So that's my two separate answers to your one question. Aditya, does that convince you now?
Yes, maybe.
Okay, so we can, if there are any follow-up questions, we can talk offline. Yeah, Vijender, please. Yeah, Vijender, please.
Regarding what you are saying, the publication of the eligibility criteria marks before the financial proposal. So I just wanted to share one of my experience in the procurement. So there was a project on Tejaswani scheme. Madhya Pradesh government ने Tejaswani scheme का procurement impact evaluation कराने के लिए उन्होंने tender float किया था. तो they basically started with an EOI and then they asked for an RFP. So we submitted an EOI and then we submitted an RFP. So we had some internal person there. So what happened कि हमने जब internal technical proposal बनाया और उनको submit किया, तो MP government ने उस time पे technical eligibility criteria जो है public कर दिया उन्होंने अपनी website के through. And हमें ये पता था कि अब कितनी organizations ने apply किया था, किस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को कितने टेक्निकल मार्क्स मिले थे और हमें कितने मिले थे. तो वी वर इन टॉप 10. नंबर 1 पे कोई और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन था. देन देयर कुछ और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन थे जिन्होंने हमारे यहाँ भी एम्पैनलमेंट के लिए किया हुआ है, तो वो भी थे और हम भी थे. नाउ अब हमें ये पता था कि हमारे कंपटीटर कौन कौन है और उनके कंपटीटर के कौन कौन से टेक्निकल एक्सपर्ट जो है वो ले सकते. सो इसमें दो चीजें होती हैं. एक होता है पोचिंग होती है. अब हमें पता है कि सामने वाली कंपनी ने इसको इतने मार्क्स मिले हैं, हमें ये भी पता है. छोटा सा वर्ल्ड है, इसके अंदर डिफरेंट कंसल्टेंट होते हैं जो एक ही कंसल्टेंट का सीवी 10 जगह जाता है. तो हमें ये भी पता है कि कौन सा कंसल्टेंट किस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के पास जा सकता है. तो वहाँ पे कोचिंग होता है उनको ज्यादा पैसे देके. सेकंड एक उसमें ये होता है कि अब हमें टेक्निकल स्कोर पता है, हमें ये भी पता है 70-30 या 60-40 का रेशियो, और अकॉर्डिंगली हम अपना फाइनेंशियल बिड भी ट्वीट कर सकते हैं. सो दैट हैपेंड. ये हमने किया भी था, पर हमने ना ही ज्यादा बनाया था बजट, ना ही हमने कम बनाया था. हमने इस हिसाब से रखा था कि हम टॉप 3 में आ जाएं. बट कुछ कभी ये होता है कि अगर टेक्निकल प्रपोजल्स टेक्निकल बिड के एलिजिबिलिटी क्राइटेरिया पब्लिक कर भी दे, तो कई बार होता है कि कुछ भी नहीं होता है. बस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस होती हैं, अपना बजट बनाती हैं, सबमिट कर देती है. बट ये देयर इज अ सिनेरियो. हमने खुद ने भी किया था. हमें पता था कि कौन से कंसल्टेंट को ज्यादा पैसे देके अपने पास लाया जा सकता है, ताकि क्योंकि पेनल्टी नहीं था सब्स्टिट्यूशन पे, तो वो किया जा सकता है, किसका सीवी हटवाया जा सकता है. ये बहुत सारे सर्कमस्टेंसेस क्रिएट हो जाते हैं पब्लिक करने से एलिजिबिलिटी क्राइटेरिया.
Thank you so much, Vijender, for sharing your experience here. Aditya, you have any follow-up question for Vijender?
No more follow-up questions, but it just seems like game theory.
Okay. But yes, yeah, Adhiraj, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Just a hypothetical situation. Let's say you start off with a open tender or a limited tender, And despite best efforts, whatever, because either the eligibility criteria is too high or there's not sufficient interest, you only get one responsive bidder. You re-advertise, you still get only the same responsive bidder. Can you then count that as single source nominated and nominate them, or what do you do in that case?
Yes, so single tender, and I'm going to find out if I can open GFR and show you. So any procurement which leads to single bid is actually considered as a single source selection. So let me just quickly see if I can show you a particular clause which talks about this. Okay, so this is clause subclause 21. I'm just sharing my screen. Metri, can you confirm if you can see my screen? I'm sharing GFR rule number 173 subclause 21.
Yes, Parish, it is visible.
Okay, so let me just probably go down a bit. So here it is, Adhiraj. When a limited or open tender results in only one effective offer, it shall be treated as a single tender contract. And then single tender contract, the nomination basis route, where then the rules under single tender, the principles start becoming valid. And in my previous sessions, I'd also showed you the new guidelines that have been circulated by Ministry of Finance, which says that if you have advertised it to the best of your capacities, if you have ensured that that the evaluation criteria was not unduly restrictive, and the price that is quoted by this one bidder, if that is also reasonable, in that case, earlier the suggestions from IFT and probably the authority was always that go for retendering. But now what Ministry of Finance says that if you have done all the due diligence, you have followed all the steps, you can go ahead with single tender contracts as well.
So I have a follow-up to that then.
Yeah.
Suppose that situation emerges and we go with a single tender contract.
Yeah.
Now on this, what you're showing on your screen, clause 14 says negotiation should be discouraged.
Yeah.
Right? Can you negotiate if it's a single tender?
No, we can't. We can't. So whatever rates they have quoted remains final. And if you feel they are reasonable, which means, let's say for the case of Spice Board, we received only one tender, but we had followed all advertisement route. We had our evaluation criteria wasn't at all restrictive, and the quote was below 25 lakh rupees that we were looking for. Under those circumstances, we accepted the tender, and even competent authority also approved the award of the contract to that entity. So yes, we never negotiated with them. So Adhiraj, does that answer your query now? Or do you have any follow-up questions?
I have one follow-up question. Sorry,
please go ahead.
Every time.
No, please go ahead.
This is with regard to Rule 153, the MSME thing. Rule 153, clause 6.
Okay, let me just quickly go on to that. But meanwhile, why don't you share your query?
The query is if you have more than one bidder and one of them is an MSME that has quoted within a price band range of 15% more than the L1 price.
First thing, Rule 153 is actually for goods. So probably we should not get into discussions on rules which are meant for goods and works.
No, this is the Manual for Procurement and Consultancy.
Oh, okay. So I was talking about GFR. Okay, let me just quickly go. Is there a rule in 153 here?
1.9.1.
Okay. So I'm just going to scroll down a bit. So is there a specific subclause that you're referring to?
6. 1.9.16.
Okay. So in tender, participating industry quoting prices within price band of L1 plus 15% shall also be allowed to supply a portion of requirement by bringing the other price to L1 price in a situation where L1 price is from someone other than MSC. Okay. And is this about consultancy or other services? I'm just going to read that. If you can just give me a second. Okay. So I think it does allow
and things like that too. So
yeah. So let me come back to you on this clause. So if I understand your query correctly, you mean to say that if there's L1, there's L2, and there's the difference between them is 15%, and L2 happens to be an MSME. Can we award the contract to an MSME? Right. That's your query.
Do we have to?
Okay, so let me come back to that. This is new to me, so let me address that query in the subsequent session. I'll just take note of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Maitri, in the chat before I just give a quick run through of how these guidelines look like?
No, but nothing on the chat.
Okay. So I'll just take maybe a couple of more minutes to just run you through this 20-pager guidelines document that we have. So this is the cover page that you see on the screen, index, glossary, introduction. So what you see at clause 1.3 is the vision of the DMO and the program objectives that I was talking about in one of the slides. What you see in clause number 2 is introduction about those monitoring and evaluation studies. Objectives of the program in clause number 3. So the three objectives that I spoke about, components of the program, awarding of studies, related surveys, desk-based research, or organizing training sensitization programs is covered in this particular RFP. So for that matter, tomorrow, if for conducting some trainings for, let's say, Maharashtra survey and CAPI tool, if you want to reach out to a third party to help us impart those trainings at the state level, we can use this MESD studies guidelines to get approval from IFT. So that's what this particular guidelines can allow us to do. Eligibility for consultants, for limited tenders, as I said, Samavesh, where we have MOU, SOI signed, they all, or chair professor units, they get additional priority. But other than that, anyone and everyone can participate for the various studies that we have. There are certain set of guidelines for awarding projects to individuals as well. So this, while I haven't got into details in this particular session, but whenever at whatever stage, if you are planning to award projects to individuals based on MESD guidelines, you can have a look at the eligibility and their evaluation criteria. I've spoken about the constitution of TECCN and TEC, which is covered in clause 7.5, 7.7. There are other specific clauses around release of funds, where that sharing of bank details, mobilization advance, first installment, all those things have been provided in this particular document. So I'm not getting into operational details there. So if at all you get into a role which mandates you to understand the process really well, I would suggest that you go through these guidelines in far more details. What else? What you see on the screen now is the installment breakup. So 40% as the first installment, which is given immediately at the time of award of contract, 30% at the second installment stage after submission of first draft report, and after project completion, the rest of 30%. Now, this is what MESD guidelines suggest, but we can always have our own payment structure if you're going to follow model RFP, as far as it's in the broader framework of GFR and in broader framework of these guidelines. One more thing which I haven't covered in the slides is desk-based research. The desk-based research can also be awarded through this particular guidelines, and this shall be done by individuals. This is going to be done on a single source selection nomination basis, and the financial ceiling here is actually 5 lakh rupees. And pretty much the rest of them is operational details around termination of the contract, bonds, and subsequent forms. Okay, so that's the MESD guidelines for you. I'm going to again stop my sharing here, go back to the deck. So where are we? And what will I be covering in the next session? So we have finished so far talking about government rules and procedures. I have also explained how do you start drafting an RFP, what terms of reference should be included. once you have drafted your RFP and your terms of reference are finalized and you have done the budgeting, what we covered today is what mode of procurement should you follow. Should you go ahead with a limited tender route, or should you go ahead with a open tender route or a nomination basis, or should you get it done through a knowledge institution or through an individual is something that we have covered today. And all the underlying procedures, principles, qualification criteria is something that we have covered today. What we are going to cover in next 2 sessions is, if at all you're going through an open tender procurement process and your draft RFP in terms of reference are ready, what is the procedure that you have to follow to take that draft RFP to a award of contract stage. So that is the session 4. Session 5 will talk about limited tender process. So if again your if your RFP is ready, your terms of reference are ready, to take that draft RFP to a limited tender stage to an award of contract stage, what are the steps involved? So those are the 2 things that we will be covering in the subsequent 2 sessions. And the last session we will have a walkthrough of the CPP portal. So 3 more sessions, and so far I can only thank you for all your participation and the kind of questions, the kind of discussions that we are having today. It's just encourages us, it motivates us, it also puts us into thinking mode. So there is a lot of homework for me as well. So I'm going to go back to those clauses and give you more clarity in the next session. So with that, this is all I had. But before I close, open up for questions. Yeah, Rohan, go ahead.
Since Adhiraj asked about MSMEs, can I ask one more on MSME?
You can ask me 2 more. Yeah, go ahead.
So there was something that there's no bank guarantee needed from now on. There's something surety bond is needed from MSMEs. Could you please explain it next time when you explain Adhiraj?
No, I can answer it straight away. So what are the bonds or guarantees that we are asking for? So one is the bid security, right? When you submit a bid, we ask our applicants to submit a bid security amount. That amount could be 1,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees, could be lakh rupees, could also be 2.5 lakh rupees or so and so forth. And GFR talks about, if your contract is X, maybe 2.5 or 2 to 5%, actually 2 to 5% of that value can be bid security. Now, what was happening is, because of this bid security amount, we realized that a lot of our MSMEs were actually not participating in the RFP. So now, through Ministry of Finance circulars and circulars from Ministry of Commerce as well, Ministry of MSME as well, what we have now done is we have exempted MSMEs from bid security. So all they do is they give us a declaration. They really do not submit any draft or check with us. So that is already done. And for that matter, in cases of because of the current COVID wave, we have relaxed that for everyone, because we understand that they're going through working capital issues. So bid security is exempted. They only have to give us declarations. The other exemption, we spoke about performance security last time, that has been dropped down to 3%. Again, will help us improve working capital requirements, not just for MSMEs, but for all companies. The third exemption that MSMEs have is under conditions of eligibility. So if any of our criteria is about seeking past experience or seeking some past revenues, and this is eligibility condition, which even stops MSMEs from even applying for the RFP. Those conditions can actually be relaxed for MSMEs if they can give us documents for that. So this has been given. This has actually been shared with us through circulars from Ministry of Finance, that we need to give those exemptions to them. And before I close the call, probably I'll quickly bring your attention to that clause now that I've spoken about. So our RFP actually allows all such exemptions, as far as they give us supporting documents. Yeah. So if you read clause 2.2.1, and I'm just going to, Rohani, are you able to see my screen? I'm sharing a Word document. This is the draft RFP.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, and I'm going to highlight that particular statement. The conditions of eligibility as specified in the RFP may be relaxed for a particular applicant, if applicable, subject to furnishing of relevant and valid documents or certificates supporting such relaxations or exemptions under applicable laws. Now, coming to your example and what Adhiraj was talking about, if MSME is seeking such relaxation or exemption, or any other organization, it could be government institution given some exemptions, or academic research organizations given some exemptions, and the circulars keep coming time and again. So what we say is we have given a general clause. If you want exemption, give us all the supporting documents. Tell us which are the laws or rules that you are seeking exemption under. If they are found to be true, they are found to be applicable, we will give those exemptions to you. But these exemptions are for conditions of eligibility. These are not for evaluation. Evaluations will still be done and on a equal merit level. Rohani, does that answer query now?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Metri, any more questions for me on the chat?
No, just in the chat.
Okay. So let me see where we are. Okay, so with that, probably then we will close the call here.